To kiss me. I panicked. I'd been waiting all my life for that kiss, and now? I yanked free and ran back to my table. And when I sat down, John whispered, "Did he just try to kiss you?" I turned my chair away from Bryce and whispered, "Can we please talk about something else? Anything else?" People were whispering and looking my way. And when Shelley Stoltz came back from cleaning up in the washroom, everyone felt quiet. Her hair looked awful. It was sort of oiled to her scalp and still had little chunks of food in it. She glared at me so hard it looked like she was trying to get laser beams to shoot from her eyes. A couple of others steered her back to her seat. And then everyone started whispering double speed. And Bryce didn't even seem to care. He kept trying to come over and talk to me, but either he'd get intercepted by a teacher or I'd dash away from him before he had the chance to say anything. When the dismissal bell finally rang, I said a quick goodbye to John and bolted out the door. I couldn't reach my bike fast enough. I was the first one off campus, and I pedaled home so hard it felt as though my lungs would burst. Mrs. Tuoby was out front watering her flower bed, and she tried to say something to me, but I just dropped my bike in the driveway and escaped into the house. I certainly didn't want to talk about roosters. My mother heard me slamming doors and came to check on me in my room. "Juliana, what's wrong?" I flipped over my bed to face her and wailed. "I am so confused. I don't know what to think or feel or do." She sat down beside me on the bed and stroked my hair. "Tell me what happened, sweetheart." I hesitated, then threw my hands up in the air. "He tried to kiss me." My mother struggled not to let it show, but underneath her composed expression was a growing smile. She leaned in a little and asked, "Who did?" "Bryce." She hesitated. "But you've always liked him." The doorbell rang, and rang again. My mom started to get up, but I grabbed her arm and said, "Don't get that." The bell rang again, and almost right after that, there was a loud knocking at the door. "Mom, please, don't get it. That's probably him." "But sweetheart, I was over him, completely over him." "Since when?" "Since last Friday, after the dinner. If he had vanished from the face of the earth after our dinner at the Loskis, I wouldn't have cared." "Why? Did something happen at the dinner that I don't know about?" I threw myself back onto my pillow and said, "It's too complicated. Mom, I just can't talk about it." "My," she said after a moment, "don't you sound like a teenager?" "I'm sorry," I whimpered, because I knew I was hurting her feelings. I sat up and said, "Mom, all those years I liked him, I never really knew him. All I knew was that he had the most beautiful eyes I'd ever seen, and that his smile melted my heart like the sun-matched butter. But now I know that inside he's a coward and a stick. So I've got to get over what he's like on the outside." My mother leaned back and crossed her arms. "Well," she said, "isn't this something?" "What do you mean?" She chewed the side of one cheek, then moved over to chew the other. At last she said, "I shouldn't really discuss it." "Why not?" "Because I just shouldn't. Besides, I can tell there are things you don't feel comfortable discussing with me." We stared at each other a moment, neither of us saying a word. Finally, I looked down and whispered. When Chad and I were fixing up the yard, I told him how we didn't own the house, and about Uncle David. He must have told the rest of the family, because the day before the Loskis dinner party, I overheard Bryce and his friend making cracks about Uncle David at school. I was furious. But I didn't want you to know because you think they were only inviting us over because they felt sorry for us. I looked at her and said, "You just seemed so happy about being invited for dinner." Then I realized something. "And you've seemed happier ever since." She held my hand and smiled. I have a lot to be happy about." Then she sighed and said, and I already knew they knew about Uncle David. It was fine that you talked about him. He's not a secret or anything. I sat up a little. Wait, how did you know? Patsy told me. I blinked at her. She did? Before the dinner? No, no, after. She hesitated, then said, Patsy been over several times this week. She's going through a very rough time. How come? Mom let out a deep breath and said, I think you're mature enough to keep this inside these four walls. And I'm only telling you because I think it's relevant. I held my breath and waited. Patsy and Rick have been having ferocious fights lately. Mr. and Mrs. Flosky, what about? Mom sighed. About everything, it seems. I don't understand. Very quietly, my mother said, for the first time in her life, Patsy is seeing her husband for what he is. It's 20 years and 2 children late. But that's what she's doing. She gave me a sad smile. Patsy seems to be going through the same thing you are. The phone rang and Mom said, Let me get that, okay? Your dad said he'd call if he was working overtime, and that's probably him. While she was gone, I remembered what Chet had said about someone he knew who had never learned to look beneath the surface. Had he been talking about his own daughter? And how could this happen to her after 20 years of marriage? When my mother came back, I absently asked, Is Dad working late? That wasn't Dad, sweetheart. It was Bryce. I said straight up. Now he's calling? I have lived across the street from him for 6 years and he's never once called me. Is he doing this because he's jealous?